Thank you, Speaker. I have a motion, which perhaps the clerks could put up. So I'm moving to increase the blended tax rate from the current 1.83 to 3.42 and adjust all other tax rates accordingly. This has the effect, members, of making us not have to borrow to cover the cost of the $60 million remaining in the provincial download. Effectively, what it says is, instead of borrowing from our future capital capacity, we face the facts and recognize that we will have a recurring cost in housing because of the loss of GTA compensation pooling, and that we tell people honestly, this is a burden that we have to bear. The province is no longer willing to pay it. Now, for those of you who are interested in the impact on individual householders, I've worked with staff and done a quick calculation. The proposed property tax increase, as coming from the Mayor and the Executive Committee, works out to about $60 a year. That's about, it works out to about $84 a year for the average household. That's about $7 a month. With the changes I'm proposing here, that $7 a month becomes $12 a month. For an additional $5 a month from the average household, we do not need to borrow from our future ability to manage public finances. That's the essence of what I've done here. And the reason I'm doing it is very simple. If you look at the staff's projection for where we're going to be next year and the year after, we're actually going to be in very difficult straits. The presentation we had earlier said that next year and the year after, we will have to do TTC fare increases again. We will have to increase property taxes all the way to inflation for both of those years. And then on top of that, the people who are supporting the proposed budget make a number of assumptions. They assume that on top of that, we will be able to find $305 million in savings from somewhere, not from a property tax increase, not from service cuts next year. That we will have to find $275 million in savings, not property tax increases, not service cuts, next year. It assumes also that we will be able to absorb the cost overruns of the York University subway, $400 million, without increasing property taxes or cutting services. It assumes further that we're going to be able to pay back this loan that we have borrowed from ourselves, plus interest, without increasing property taxes or cutting services. It assumes that we're going to be able to find $1.8 billion to pick up the share of the housing capital costs that the federal and provincial governments haven't come forward to cover yet, without cutting services or increasing property taxes. It assumes further that the annualization, the full year cost of the service enhancements in this year's budget will somehow be found without increasing property taxes or cutting services. It assumes further that the poverty reduction strategy, which we are told is going to be introduced sometime later this year, will be able to be financed without cutting services or increasing property taxes. That's a lot of assumed efficiency. It's about $2.5 billion worth of assumed efficiencies that we're somehow going to find in the next couple of years without harming services and without increasing property taxes. Do you know what that kind of assumption is? It's wishful thinking. You simply have never had a budget that comes anywhere close to finding that kind of service efficiencies in the history of the amalgamated City of Toronto. The best year we ever did, I think, was under Councillor Carroll, where we found about $220 million in efficiencies. And the thing about efficiencies is they get harder and harder to find every year. So rather than relying on wishful thinking, rather than telling Torontonians, we don't know where the money's going to come from, that $2.5 billion, it'll come from somewhere, I say we face facts. I say we tell Torontonians that we are willing as a government to be honest and to collect the money for the services that Torontonians demand. If you want to take the position that you're not going to cut services, that you're not going to throw people out of housing, that you're not going to let our streets get worse, that you're not going to make people wait longer for public transit, that you're not going to shrink the number of daycare spaces, you must vote to collect the taxes to pay for those services.
Councillor Perks.
I refuse to rely on wishful thinking. Instead, I think we can be honest with Torontonians and face facts. Thank you.
Thank you. The clock behind you is working, so it's...
I have a question.
a question? Okay, Councillor Davis, you have a question. 3 minutes.
I missed the part about the cost pressures, and I wonder if you could, again, summarize those cost pressures we'll be facing in the next few years.
Well, from the staff presentation earlier today, the cost pressures before some of the other measures are $305 million in cost pressures for 2016, $276 in cost pressures for 2017, $1.6 billion for capital costs for TCHC. The financial issues, which we're going to be dealing with later from Metrolinx newly downloading some costs onto us, the annualization of all the 2015 new and enhanced. I don't have a number for that, unfortunately. The poverty strategy, which is supposed to be introduced later this summer, we don't have a number for that. The cost overruns for the York University subway at $400 million. The repayment of $130 million from the self-borrowing program, plus about $8 or $9 million in interest payments on that. Oh, and yes, one other. Any costs associated with Smart Track that we have to bear in the next couple of years, anything for engineering studies, environmental assessments, which we have not already budgeted for, any land acquisition, any cost of running infrastructure under tracks in those areas, all of those costs are not budgeted in our forecast.
Okay, thank you. We're recessed to 2 o'clock. Thank you.